Welcome again to the course of Organizational Theory and Behavior. I'm your course instructor Shehzad Khan Durrani, lecturer, Institute of Business Studies, Cohort University of Science and Technology, Hangu campus. In today's lecture, we will talk about conflict and its types. So let's start from the outline. Our outline, it includes conflict. So we will talk about the basic concept and the definition of the conflict. Then we will talk about the types of conflict. What are some of the types of conflict? And they are, we will talk about personal conflict. We will talk about intra-group conflict. Then we will discuss inter-group conflict. And at the end, we will try to understand inter-organizational conflict. Definition and the concept of conflict. So what is conflict, right? Conflict is actually, it can be defined as the basic concept of the conflict, an expression of hostility, negative attitude, aggression, rivalry, and misunderstanding, right? It can be the misunderstanding between the two individuals, or between the two groups, or among the individuals, or among the groups, right? It can be within the organization, or it can be between the two organizations as well. It can be between the two departments as well, right? It's about hostility, negative attitude, aggression, and the competition, of course. Then conflict may emerge between different organizations or within organization, right? So it can be inter-organizations, right? Between the two organizations, or it can present within the organization, the conflict. Now various definition of conflict, and they are: conflict is a state of discord caused by the actual or perceived opposition of needs, values, and interests between people working together. People, they are working in an environment, right? Where they are working in an environment. So people belongs to different cultures, so it means that their values are different. People can have of different interests, right? That the place that they are working, they can have of different interests as well, right? They can have of different needs, or they can face different problems as well, right? So conflict is a state of discourse caused by the actual of perceived opposition, right, of needs. It can be the needs, it can be the values, that cultures in which they belong to, and interest between people working together. Conflict is a serious disagreement or argument between two or more persons, right? So you can also call it a tussle, a disagreement, right? Conflict, right? So types of conflict. The first one, first we will try to understand its background, right? So there are disagreements among individuals, as we already talked about it. There can be differences or disagreements present between the two, or like the various departments, and between unions and management, right? Or it can be the union and the management as well. Another one, there are various forms of conflict involving rivalries, for example, like with your competitors. Jealousies, it exists, right? Like professional jealousies, the term that is used in most organizations. Personality clashes, people personalities and their styles are different, right? So there can be personality. Role definitions, like for example role conflict we call it, right? So and struggles for power and favor, right? So some people are struggling for power, for the favor, right? So the conflict can exist among them. So that's why we differentiate, or we divided the conflict into different types. There is also conflict within individual, such as competing needs and demands, right? Competing needs and demands, right? So there's also conflict exists for the needs and the demands, right, in the organization. So let's start from the types. The first one is the personal conflict. So personal conflict involves a conflict between two people, right? So it's most important one, like it exists between the two people, right? Or it can be like more than two people, personal conflict. Most often form of mutual dislike and personality clash. If you dislike someone, right? So they, for example, the two people, they can have of different nature, right? So there exists a personality clash. Boston University research on conflict, it says that causes for workplace conflict, right? They are focusing on the workplace conflict, can be personality or style differences and personal problems, right? So it's one of the conflict type, personality or style differences. For example, people, for example, they, according to the personality, they are having a leadership style, for example, or their management, for example, their roles in management can be different according to their own personality, maybe, or personal problems, right? Further, they are talking about organization factors such as leadership, right? So Boston research also focus on the leadership, for example, the management, for example, right? The style of the management that they are following, and disagreement about the core values can also contribute, right? There can be, for example, the different core values, for example, can also contribute. Clear? There can be disagreements on certain topics, or there can be disagreement on certain, for example, goals or objectives, or for example, the way they want to adopt. In the personality conflict, there is another study of the University of Colorado, right? And they are saying that primary causes of work conflict is like such as they are, the first one, poor communication, right? So they are saying that the personality conflict exists just because of the poor communication, right? That people have, right? So it can be another cause, the poor communication. The next one we can have the different values that people possess, right? People can have, like, they belong to different cultures, they can have different values, right? The next one, differing interests, the different kinds of interests, we already talked about it. People can have scarce resources, right? And this is also when you have the scarce resources, so people are fighting for that in order to get it, right? So sometime the research is going on that the sometime the effects of the conflict can be positive. It can improve the performance, but in most cases the conflict is negative, right? Its relation to the performance is negative mostly. Personality clashes, and of course personality clashes. And poor performance, last one, poor performance, right? It can be the cause of the personal conflict. Intra group conflict, right? So conflict arises in groups because of the scarcity of freedom, position, and resources, right? Intra group, when you are in the same group, right, and you have conflict within that group, right? So that's actually called intra group conflict, right? And that can be of scarcity of freedom, like position and resources. People who seek power therefore struggle with others for position or status within the group, right? So people who are looking for power struggle with others for position or struggle or status within the group, right? So they're struggling for it. There is a competition present between the two individuals or among the individuals. Rewards and recognitions are often perceived as insufficient and improperly distributed, right? So people are mostly like complaining. They are complaining about, for example, the rewards and the recognitions, for example, right? They are saying that nobody is recognizing, for example, their efforts, right? So it can be the cause, like the conflict, are often perceived as insufficient. People are saying that these are insufficient. I'm not taking for example, if they are struggling hard, they're working hard for the organization, but they are treating differently and improperly distributed, and the resources are not properly distributed. So it can lead to conflict, right? And improperly distributed the resources. So different cultures we have. So intra-group, that is because of the different cultures. So winning is more acceptable than losing. In some culture, for example, winning is more acceptable than losing. They are saying, for example, I want to be the winner. For them, they are really stubborn people. They don't want to accept defeat, right? Even if they are on the wrong way or on the wrong path, or maybe their for example, their statements are not correct, right? But still they are saying that I'm right? So it belongs to their cultures, right? Competition is more prevalent than cooperation. They are not cooperative. For them, competition is more important, right? So according to different cultures, there can be a conflict. Or group meetings are often conducted in a win-lose climate, right? This is another one of the dark dilemma of our organization, right? That there is not a win-win situation, right? Somebody has to win and somebody has to lose, right? They are going to reward one person, but the other person is not getting anything, right? So he's only getting some, like for example, discouraging words or some hurting words, right? Which is not good in most organizations. So win-lose climate exists, which can lead to intra-group conflict. So another kind of conflict that we have is called the intergroup conflict, right? The conflict between two groups or among the groups, that's called the inter-conflict, right? Intergroup conflict. So let's start intergroup conflict. Intergroup conflict occurs in various forms, right? It has various forms. The first one, that is called the horizontal strain, right? What is horizontal strain, right? The conflict that involves competition between functions, right? For example, production function and sales function, right? So examples of that are sales versus production. For example, their functions are different, right? Research and development versus engineering, purchasing versus legal, line versus staff, and so on. Sales versus production department, for example, they have different functions. Let's say that the sales department is proactive, but there is like lack of responsibility from the production department. The production department is not responding well on time according to the demands that the sales departments are getting, right? So there can be a conflict. The same goes for the research and development versus engineering. We can see in different projects the conflict exists between the engineering and the research and development department. Purchasing versus legal, yes, of course, line versus staff, and so on, right? So there can be conflict exist, right? The next one, we have the vertical strain, right? What is vertical strain? So it involves competition between hierarchical levels, right? We have different hierarchies, top level management, middle level management, and low level management. When there is a conflict present between them, right? Let's say examples of them are union versus management, right? For example, there can be a conflict between union versus management. Foreman versus middle management, right? There can be a conflict between them. Shop workers versus foremen, right? So such kind of conflicts are called the vertical strain, and the conflict that exists, for example, between different functions, right, that the organization is doing. So such kind of conflict is called the intergroup conflict. So the next one, we have the inter-organizational conflict, right? So what does it mean? It means that such kind of conflict is based on the inter-organizational relationships, the relationships that you have with different organizations. If you have a good relationship, you won't have any conflict. But if you have bad terms, right, with other organizations, then it can lead to conflict, right? And the examples of inter-organization conflict are buyer-supplier relationship, for example, right? Or for example, joint ventures relationship, right? For example, if you are in good terms with your ventures, with your joint ventures, there will be no conflict, right? The next one, for example, strategic alliances, for example, right? You have your partners, so the relationship of you, of your organization with the partners that you have, right? So among the distinguishing feature of inter-organization conflicts are, what are some of its features, the characteristic, decision-making parties with specific incentives and motivations, right? So it's, for example, the decision-making parties it involves, right? With specific intense incentives that they are providing and the motivation that they are giving. It depends on that, right? And the last one is the presence of a governance structure to prevent and manage conflict. If there is a very good, well-governed system that exists, there will be no conflict. So it depends on this. So that's called the inter-organizational conflict. So we defined 4 types of conflict: personal conflict, we have intergroup, intra-group, and inter-organizational conflict. These are the references that I used while making my slides. Thank you.